Hi, I'm Wilson Lai.
我是蔡明亮
And you're listening to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us. We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. Better still, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify. If you'd like to share a message with us, feel free to drop us an email at hello@deepcutpod.com. You can also find us at deepcutpod.com to find links to our socials, Discord, and Patreon. Welcome to the final episode in our Hong Kong International Film Festival interview series, and I've saved arguably the best for last. One of the most incredible moments of the festival and of the year so far for me has been when I got to interview a master of cinema himself, Tsai Ming-liang, who was honored this year at the festival as a filmmaker in focus. So they screened a lot of his films in newly restored versions, and I think maybe some prints, but Tsai Ming-liang is a filmmaker, as an art house filmmaker that I discovered really early on in my own cinephile journey. I first watched his film Goodbye, Dragon Inn, his 2003 feature in 2016, and was immediately captured by the way that Tsai works with pace and expresses sensuality in his films. I thought his films were really special and unique and moved me in ways that so many other films weren't able to or didn't even, have the capacity to at all. So it was a true honor to sit down with Tsai and sort of pick his brain. I didn't have that much time, so I really jumped around in his filmography and asked questions that were really specific to my sort of wants in knowledge wise. I really wanted to know some different things about different films that he made, but I'm just very grateful for his generosity in answering questions. I also need to shout out my friend Mona Shi, who helped me translate questions into Chinese, and also whose voice you will hear translating Tsai's answers back into English. I hope you get as much out of this interview as I did. And without further ado, here is my conversation with director Tsai Ming-liang.
So thank you so much for joining me today for this interview. I am a big fan of yours. I've been watching your films for over 10 years. And I really, love how your films explore personal identity, loneliness, and finding connection and finding sensuality as well. A lot of different things. And you opened my eyes to a lot of cinema.
好，谢谢。
So this year, you are here presenting 3 films at this year's Hong Kong International Film Festival. So you have 2 older films and 1 newer film. And what do you hope audiences discovering your films for the first time will take from these films?
观众第一次接收我的电影，通常都是在电影节。
Audiences usually encounter my films for the first time at film festivals, not commercial cinemas, which means they've already made a choice. They come prepared to see a director's creation. So I don't think there is really any barrier of entry to my work. With each of the films, they will naturally discover that this director is a bit different. The narrative style, the filmmaking approach, the way cinematic elements are used. I see it as offering them a new experience. People who see my work for the first time usually feel like they're watching a kind of film they've never seen before. I think that's roughly it.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that. Let's maybe start from your oldest film, Rebels of the Neon God, is your first feature film. And to me, it feels a bit special as it is from an era of your filmmaking where you weren't making maybe slow cinema and you were Yeah, I just wanted to ask about how you came to make this film and how did you enter into the film industry in Taiwan?
我觉得我的思考是，我想拍一个真实的电影。
My thinking is that I want to make a real film. Although I studied theater and drama, I realized that in my own viewing experience, the films that perform reality authentically always fascinate me. So I wanted to make something less dramatic, which is why I chose Lee Kang-sheng as my actor. I used his real-life experiences in Rebels of the Neon God, making the film very close to an expression of reality. For example, the home in the movie was his actual home, though of course I hired actors to play his parents. But the structure of his character's family is based on his real one. All of the situations his character encounters come from his own life too, like not wanting to go to university while his father insists that he should. The depiction of Taipei as the background was also presented in a very slice-of-life manner. I started wanting to capture a sense of reality, which led to the pace of my work becoming not dramatic and not fast-tracked. They proceed in a daily, lifelike way, which is why you feel the films I make are slower.
So would you say later on you were straying farther from this realism or biographical type of filmmaking? Why did you want to move further from that?
总之，我不喜欢戏剧性，所以再怎么拍我的电影是偏向写实的。
In general, I dislike drama, so no matter how I make my films, they tend to lean towards realism and stay close to performing reality. Even my subject matter is grounded in reality. For instance, Lee Kang-sheng had a condition in real life that led to his neck being crooked for about 10 months, and I accompanied him to the doctor. I incorporated that experience into my third film, The River, and even the medical process in the film reflects reality. Of course, I also add to it some elements that I personally want to express, so his character was shaped as a gay man, and his father as an older gay man. So there is a bit of dramatization, but the core remains the presentation of what is real. With every film, I think about whether I can make its expression even more unique, but the foundation is always reality. The acting and everything stays very true to life.
Very interesting. Yeah, because I maybe think about your film like The Whole, which had a lot of dreamy sequences and musical sequences as well. What is sort of the realist base of a film like The Whole?
其实是一个别人出题给我的一个。
The Whole was actually a commissioned work. A French TV station asked me to make a film about the arrival of the year 2000, a sort of film set in the future. I shot it in 1998. And the future I imagined was very bleak. There's constant rain and the emergence of diseases. That was my imagination. Of course, my imagination wasn't baseless. It was based on my reflection of where I saw our era heading. Anyway, I knew I wanted to make a very cold film, a very cool film. But at the same time, I wondered if I could find and introduce a rather contrasting element to prevent the work from feeling too distant or too cold. So I decided to use a genre I love, the movie musicals of the 1960s. I even used the songs in full, the original vocals, the original recordings from the era, and stylistic elements from the era. So it's an intentional contrast. A confrontation between cold and warmth, between the old era and the new.
You mentioned the musicals of the 60s that inspired some sequences in that film. I was wondering, do you have any recommendations for movie musicals? Are you a fan of musicals?
我非常喜欢歌舞片。
I really love movie musicals, especially those from the US and Hong Kong. For example, Gene Kelly's musicals. I rewatched them while I was in university, and I found them absolutely brilliant. As for musicals from Hong Kong, I watched them when I was younger, so they left a deep impression on me, including a singer named Grace Chang. I've used her songs in full. I am completely obsessed.
I wanted to ask about maybe your childhood growing up. So you didn't grow up in Taiwan, you grew up in Malaysia.
Yes.
And I was wondering what your connection, or if you bring anything from your childhood in Malaysia into your films, and if you were ever to go and make a film in Malaysia.
那个时代，大概50年代到60年代是电影
I consider myself a child of the 1960s. To me, the period from the 1950s to the 1960s was this golden age of cinema. During that time, everywhere in the world, maybe excluding China and the Soviet Union, which I don't really know about, but everywhere else, grand and large cinemas were everywhere. It was almost like the movie theaters were the first sign of globalization. And so a massive volume of films were produced then, no less than today, truly a massive volume. And they started leaning more towards entertainment films like Hollywood or Hong Kong cinema. So I am a child of that golden age, a child of the cinemas. Our experience of watching films shaped our lives because we didn't watch them in modern cinemas of today. We watched them in huge cinemas with 1,000 seats. There was a sense of ritual, almost religion-like. As in, to me, a cinema is kind of like a church or kind of like a temple. You went there every day, and your seniors, for example, my maternal grandparents were huge fans of film. They watched films every day. And so I watched films every day. It profoundly influenced my life.
That's incredible. And you've made a movie about how important theaters are as a cinematic home or church for people. I'm going to ask about, I guess, people watching movies on streaming services and TVs. What do you think about that? Do you think that you still think that people should be going to theaters to watch movies?
我觉得是一个最糟的时代。我觉得很不好的时代，而且戏院变小了。
I think we are in the worst of times. I think it's truly a terrible time. Cinemas have also become smaller, and they're mostly inside shopping malls, which is terrible. That religious quality, the sense of ritual, they're gone. Standalone cinemas have vanished. Recently, I went back to Malaysia, and a friend took me to a dinner in a hotel. That hotel used to be the cinema I went to as a child. Now it's a hotel, a restaurant. So cinema has become a marginal industry, very marginal already. And you'll notice films today are getting worse, a serious decline in quality, a decline that's been happening for maybe a decade. The main reason is that our directors no longer have space for aesthetic training. The essence of film is this aesthetics. Films of the past, both commercial or art house films, cared deeply about the creation of the visual image. Now everything is about storytelling. So the films aren't good to look at. They're watchable, but they don't need to be watched. The film viewing environment nowadays is also poor. At home, on phones, on tablets. So that's not really watching a film anymore. It's just consuming content. That's why I think the industry needs to rethink one question. The question of how to protect the existence of cinemas and to develop better viewing spaces for films. I now have this view that cinemas now need the protection of art museums. If major cities of the world, like New York, Paris, or Tokyo, if their art museums start to include cinemas, and I mean proper cinemas, to preserve what cinema once was. I mean, if you watch any great film now, but on a platform like Netflix, it is essentially, how do I put this? It's televising the film. So the future of film will only get worse if we don't try to take some action.
I think that's a little interesting with your trajectory of moving towards more video art or art films that are maybe broadcast in gallery spaces. So I was wondering what you would think about those kind of works if you see them as apart from works that are shown in a cinema.
因为我自己的训练是从35厘米开始的啊，所以我觉得电影。
Because my own training began with 35mm film, I still feel there is a difference between film and video art. My aesthetic training developed along that path, so I believe my films are meant to be seen in cinemas. Art museums is a concept born from compromise, a necessary compromise, because audience and museums don't have patience. Audiences in an art museum move around. They don't sit there for an hour. They might watch 3 minutes of an hour-long film and leave, thinking they've seen it all, which is a pity. But art museums do offer freedom. There are no constraints on image making in art museums. Cinemas, on the other hand, are tied to the market, and the market limits the development of films. So in Taiwan, I've been doing something specific. Regardless of whether I'm shooting a feature or a short, no matter how artistic it is, I will find a way to screen it in a cinema. I want the audience to think, is the cinema being wasted? If you treat cinemas only as a space for commercial films, it limits the development of the medium. So cinemas should show all kinds of films, long, short, creative, commercial, everything should be shown. That's why in Taiwan, I sell the tickets myself to bring the audience into the cinema to see my artistic creation, reminding them that the cinema can also function as art museums.
That's great. That's great. That's great. I think if anyone were to take anything from this interview, it'd be the importance of going to the cinema to watch movies.
是，电影院很重要。但是我有觉得，我这十几年在全世界跑。
Yes, yes, yes. Cinemas are very important. I've sensed, though, as I traveled the world over the last decade or so, that many filmmakers are aware of the film industry's decline, the film industry's crisis. So many of those who love film have urged their government to fund film centers, which I think is very important. When I visited Italy, Spain, or Taiwan, Hong Kong, increasingly I see nonprofit spaces popping up, and they show great films, curated programs, directors' work. Interestingly, more young people enjoy these kind of films now, while cinemas showing mainstream films are actually decreasing. So I think there are pros and cons, but the core idea remains. Films should be seen in cinemas, and they should be seen in good cinemas.
To shift gears a little bit, I want to ask a question about something specific in your films. So the characters in your films have very interesting relationships with fruits and vegetables. And I wanted to ask how do you choose your fruits and vegetables for your films? With a melon in Vive l'Amour, a watermelon in The Wayward Cloud, and even a cabbage in Stray Dogs.
都很生活化的东西，很平常的。像台湾有很多西瓜，尤其在
They're all very everyday objects, very ordinary. Like, Taiwan has many watermelons, especially in summer, and maybe the tastiest watermelons in the world might be found in Taiwan. Sometimes in Taiwan, cabbage, for example, there might be a surplus of it. Many are not bought because there's simply too much, so there's news of people turning them into fertilizer or dumping them into rivers. These things all give me ideas, and they make me think about, say, ecological issues. In general, the props I use in my films are all everyday items I personally like to use too. For instance, I love shooting rice cookers. Every person in Taiwan has a rice cooker at home to make rice, and they're all from a specific brand called Ta Tong rice cookers. I often use items like these as props in my films.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask a follow-up question to that, because you said it's inspired by everyday life. And a lot of your films take place in these sort of liminal spaces where people don't inhabit, like abandoned houses or abandoned buildings. Do you think that's also part of your view of everyday life in Taiwan or in Taipei?
我个人喜欢建筑，我很喜欢看建筑，到哪里我都会去注意他们的建筑，欣赏他们。
I personally love buildings. I really enjoy looking at buildings. Wherever I go, I will notice the buildings there and admire them. Because I really like to personify buildings. Every building is a person with its own personality. Usually, I think buildings are most beautiful at two stages. The first is before they're complete, when they still have that distinctive form full of personality. Once people move in, the buildings usually become ugly because people will uglify it. Buildings have a really deep connection with humans, as in the owner's character is reflected in the property's arrangement. The other stage where buildings are beautiful is when people leave them. The unimportant things start to rot and break down, and the building's original raw state emerges again. Of course, the relationship between buildings and humans is tight. People can represent buildings, and buildings can represent people. Since my films have very little language, there's little dialogue, no music, sometimes not even, how do I put this? They become all about the relationship between the people and the setting they're in. So the setting becomes, when I need to decide where to place a person, the setting becomes incredibly important.
Interesting. And one of these spaces is that sort of abandoned space that you use a lot in Stray Dogs. And I wanted to ask you specifically about that close-up shot that you have of your two characters at the end of Stray Dogs staring at the painting, the mural on the wall in front of them. And I want to ask about pacing. How do you direct actors in this kind of scene to move so slowly. And when do you keep a timer with you? Like how do you rehearse? Like how do you get about achieving a shot that's so long that requires maybe what's arguably very little of your actors?
我通常没有 rehearsal 这个概念，我们去到一个空间，我决定了那个镜头。
We usually don't have the concept of a rehearsal. We arrive at a space, I decide on the shot, and I communicate very little to the actors. I might just say, hey, stand over there, look at that mural for as long as you like. My actors have worked with me for a long time, so they understand me very well. If I don't say cut, they don't stop. They will stay in that state. And that state, as in these really long takes, I think should be thought of in this way. When it comes to the actor's performance or my own directing intention, some carry no meaning. Some moments have meaning and some are completely meaningless. But that is exactly how real life is composed. And I love that feeling. Meaningfulness, meaninglessness, meaningfulness, meaninglessness, coexisting. That feels closer to reality. I remember for that shot, I had this idea. I was waiting there's a window beside them, and there's a train. One train had passed by, and I was waiting for a second one. But I didn't know when it would come, so I just let the actors keep standing there. Eventually, the second train came, and I was satisfied.
That's really, really great. I want to ask about your working relationship with actor Lee Kang-sheng. What do you love about working together with him? Why do you always return to working with him?
李康生很真实，他没有他是一个没有训练的概念，然后他可以一直保持这个概念。
Lee Kang-sheng is very real. He has this untrained quality, which he can maintain by essentially evoking almost this sense of, I'm not great at acting, I don't want to act. Of course, Lee Kang-sheng acts in other people's films too. Other directors may ask him to act, give him lines and demands. But I feel Lee Kang-sheng's best state is simply being himself, by being his own age without much embellishment from when he was young to now as he's older. He brings with him his own life and experiences. We live very close to each other, so I know him very well. I usually just ask him to be himself. I don't have many demands. How should I put this? Because we've worked together for so long, he understands me. I don't think he brushes off my expectations. He understands that's what I want to express, and he just expresses it. That's about it.
Great. So a final question. Our podcast is called Deep Cut, and we cover a lot of underseen filmmakers or films. And I was wondering if you had any recommendations of underseen films. It could be your own, it could be other people's, that you want to recommend to our listeners.
我现在推荐所有的观众都应该回头去看很多老片。
I would recommend that all audiences go back and watch older films, black and white films, or silent films like those by Murnau. I've watched some old films online recently, black and white films or American films from the 1940s to the 1960s, or what do you call them, Westerns by John Ford. I think audiences should revisit these films. I also call for every city to have a cinema dedicated to these films. You only know what films are when you see them on the big screen. Otherwise, you'll never know. Films people watch nowadays are, frankly, quite bad. I don't know if you feel this way, but they're hard to watch. But if you watch any old film, you'll think, wow, they really know how to shoot, or that's so beautiful. The visual imagery is handled so well. Even an ordinary American film surpasses many films today in visual quality. Film's progression is tied to human development. We keep chasing convenience and accessibility, and aesthetics become unimportant. But aesthetics is the most important thing in film. Even in Chinese language martial arts films, for example. Over all these decades, in my mind, only one director truly exists, and that's King Hu. We should watch King Hu because his films have aesthetic value. Other martial art films are just modern Marvel films, just filled with fighting and action sequences. The reason there is such a big difference is that he was a director, he was a creator, and there are others who need to make money. Money making and creativity together is how films emerge. But the audience misunderstand that now because they mostly only see the money-making films, not the films driven by creativity. People of the past used to know how to watch movies. Think of Ozu in Japan. You only got a director like that because the Japanese audience knew how to watch films. Japan also had Kurosawa. No Japanese director of today can surpass him. That is because modern Japanese directors are just telling stories, whereas the old Japanese directors were making films. There is a huge difference. So I strongly recommend everyone to watch those classic films and to revisit them.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. 谢谢.
Thank you so much to Tsai Ming-liang for joining me on the podcast, as well as Mona Shi for helping with translations. And thank you to Rainy Tao and Polly Chan from HKIFF for all your help with all the interviews that I conducted at this year's Hong Kong International Film Festival. I really felt so special. I felt a little bit like an outsider coming in, sort of an unofficial podcast, but granting me access to these filmmakers. I am very, very grateful and will continue to support HKIFF for many years to come. And thank you for listening to Deep Cut. I know you've been hearing my voice for months on end right now. I promise you we will return to regular programming next episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. A great way to support us is to leave a review or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify. If you want to chat with us and other fans of Deep Cut, come join our Discord server where we talk about movies, TV, music, and share what we're up to. If you'd like to share a message with us or have business inquiries, feel free to drop us an email at hello@deepcutpod.com. We also have a Patreon if you'd like to support us with a monthly subscription. Thank you to all our Patreon supporters, and a very special thanks to our Patreon Deep Cut Pick supporter, Leah Lai. You can keep up with Deep Cut on Instagram and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find links to everything we've mentioned here. Deep Cut is hosted and produced by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. Our cover art is designed by Justina Yam, and our theme song is composed by the one and only Eli Sands. I'm Wilson.
我是蔡明亮。
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.